Good day, everyone. I am Red Chavena, and I am pleased to present the future of tourism. Are we ready? The presentation will be exploring the issues, trends, and possible solutions that each aspect can adopt in order to keep afloat while the industry treads on the pandemic crisis. First will be the future of the tourism industry. Globally, the tourism industry faces a lot of issues that has affected 330 million workers and 7 million employers, according to the International Labour Organization study in 2020. In this slide, we will see a couple of issues which directly affects the industry. First is the intermittent government travel restrictions. This hinders businesses in providing a solid implementation of the guidelines, as each country has a varied interpretation and context to consider. Second is the drastic adaptation of the digital tourism. Some tourism enterprises had not fully embraced this, and therefore, investment in training and equipment have had a huge impact in the shift towards the trend. Third is the COVID-19 variants and resurgence. Postponement and cancellation policies have to be reviewed to consider this scenario. The sudden rise in cases due to a new variant forced the industry to shut down just when it is already gaining momentum. As a result, the global recession gave way to businesses closing down and an increase in unemployment rate. The long-term solution right now is the vaccine. However, production and distribution rates are slow, and in some countries like the Philippines, it might take 1 to 2 years to achieve herd immunity. Given these issues, the new normal industry trend shifts to health and safety as the top priorities for tourism enterprises. Furthermore, domestic travel is the focus as it is within the control of each country. The industry is opening to a lesser number of visitors through the implementation of travel bubble among nearby cities and regions. Contactless transactions are preferred as almost all bookings and payments are done virtually. Lastly, unvaccinated tourists are required to present an RT-PCR or antigen test 24 to 72 hours prior to departure, while vaccinated ones are required to present their accomplished certificates. Discounts to vaccinated tourists are also provided to encourage booking and travel. Now, we look at the future based on the perspective of two of the neighboring countries of the Philippines in Southeast Asia. In response to the current issues facing the tourism industry, Indonesia and Malaysia had focused their tourism recovery efforts in 3 areas: health, skills, and destination. In terms of health, both countries are aggressive in providing the social protection needed by the workforce through additional health benefits and implementing policies which will minimize exposure to risks and health hazards. Upskilling through the form of webinars and small-scale community movements have been done to address the shift in contactless transactions and work-from-home adjustments. Finally, both are looking towards the future of tourism recovery by means of destination readiness. Destinations will have to abide by the safety standards and minimize physical touchpoints through the use of information and communications technology within the premises. Looking at the Philippine scenario, there have been 4 phases identified since the pandemic started in 2020. In the first quarter of 2020, the first case of COVID-19 was recorded in January. Barely 2 months after, The rise in cases forced the country to impose the highest community quarantine, while the Department of Tourism was at the forefront of banning travel movement domestically and internationally. In the second quarter, the national government eased restrictions, allowing business-related travel and the operations of businesses at the skeletal workforce. From the third to fourth quarter, there was a growth in cases, prompting the national government to enforce strict quarantine measures and eventually relax towards the end of the year. With the cases being controlled at a minimum and in anticipation of the vaccine arrival, tourism enterprises started to open and air travel is allowed, given that all tourists should undergo mandatory tests and quarantine for 5 to 7 days. Vaccine inoculation programs started in late February, then in March, a new variant had infected thousands of Filipinos, which prompted another lockdown until the half of the second quarter. In response to these challenges, the government, with the recommendation from the Interagency Task Force and the DOT, implemented travel bans. It also resorted to digital platforms to address the nation for important announcements and updates. Following the opening of tourism activities, the DOT subsidized the required tests for tourists and online visitor registration prior to travel. Furthermore, a series of health and safety guidelines were issued for tourism establishments operating for leisure and MICE at a limited capacity, followed by a vaccination campaign early in 2021. In the future, the Philippines is looking at similar focus areas in comparison to Indonesia and Malaysia. A 70% herd immunity for the National Capital Region and 8 other provinces is being targeted in November this year, given that the vaccines will have a steady supply. Domestic tourism will still be the focus in 2 to 3 years recovery following the UNWTO study. Likewise, digital marketing and promotions will reinforce the return of tourism activities in the local area. On the other hand, the Safety Seal certification program had been rolled out recently as one of the solutions to address destination readiness. Now, we move to the demand perspective, which is the future of tourists. The revenge market is a coin term for tourists who wish to make up for time lost through travel. As mentioned earlier, domestic tourism is more likely to resume because tourists are also more likely to travel at short distances with less crowds, and preference will shift to outdoor activities offered by the ecotourism destinations. Also, the target market profile nowadays are considering destinations providing authentic experiences and placing importance on sustainable environmental practices. On the other hand, business leisure or bleisure market has been heavily affected as businesses had to implement budget cuts and discovered new ways of doing business in virtual platforms, hence minimizing business travel. In some situations that travel is still the best option, the trend is similar to the leisure tourist with an addition on the new conduct of organizing meetings, exhibitions, and special events through hybrid, virtual, and multi-platform formats. At this point, we now question, how can the Tourism Academia be relevant in the tourism industry? In this slide, I would like to address the gap between the industry and the Academe. The Academe is viewed as publishing COVID washing studies, which do not necessarily contribute to the why and mostly how can the challenges be addressed. Basing from the industry challenges slide earlier, I further grouped them into themes such as human resource management, health and hygiene, business resiliency, and financial management. These challenges will be analyzed based on the tourism recovery and adaptancy scenarios identified in the study of Fan and Wosler. The recovery scenarios assume that the pandemic will end in 2021. Therefore, the pacing of recovery is fast and oriented towards the normality of tourism operations and activities. The new sustainability scenario is focused on the long-term solutions relating to workforce skill flexibility. The revenge tourism is focused on the tourist behavior relating ethical and green tourism. The adaptancy scenarios assume that the pandemic will extend, hence, recovery will be slow and oriented towards accepting the pandemic as a part of the tourism industry. Both scenarios reflect the importance of preparing tourism students to not just focus in the tourism industry, but highlight its interconnectedness with the other disciplines. Also, the production of timely data from the Academe is important as it becomes relevant when industries are able to apply this in the actual scenarios. In conclusion, the key for the tourism industry to thrive and survive is building the culture of resiliency. It is evident that in the three elements, industry, tourism, and education, it all points out to the changing the mindset more than changing the situation. The future is shaped by how we think and respond to this ongoing crisis. It is imperative that these elements work for a common goal. Do we aim for recovery or adaptability? Thank you for listening, and here are my references for this presentation.